From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, I'm David Weston. Welcome now to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. Ruth Bader Ginsburg had changed the course of American law long before she came to the Supreme Court 27 years ago. As a leading advocate before the court and on the Court of Appeals, she systematically built the body of law recognizing the equal rights of women, something today we almost take for granted. 2 years ago, her remarkable life and career were chronicled in an award-winning documentary. RBG is a compelling, moving, and inspirational story of a remarkable woman and what made her the legend we came to know. Welcome now the co-director of RBG, Betsy West. Fred Friendly, Professor Emeritus at the Columbia Journalism School. Professor West earlier had a distinguished career, very distinguished career, as a long-form television news and documentary producer at ABC News and at CBS News. Betsy, thank you so much for joining us. So this is a remarkable time, a remarkable life. First of all, my condolences, because I know you became very close to the justice. And I'm sorry, it's a loss for all of us, but I know particularly for you. But give us some sense, having spent so much time close to her, what did you get to see about the greatness that maybe some of us didn't get to see just watching her on the bench?
You know, Justice Ginsburg was a surprising person in many ways. I mean, she was shy and retiring and super serious, and yet she had an extraordinary sense of humor. And she just loved to laugh. I think that was part of the reason why she was able to maintain such great relationships with all of her colleagues on the Supreme Court and really with everybody who worked with her, including her famous friendship with Justice Scalia. But it was, it was really interesting to get a little bit of a window into how practical she was, how strategic she was. She was a very strategic person, and I think you see that in a lot of her rulings. I mean, look, just an honor of a lifetime to be able to tell her story.
One of the things that strikes me as remarkable is, again, we forget when she started out, it was not recognized that the Constitution, particularly the Equal Protection Clause, even applied to women particularly.
I know.
And she systematically, over a period of years, I got to see one of her arguments in the Supreme Court when I was clerking there. She went about systematically sort of dismantling that and saying, no, Equal Protection Clause does apply. And yet she never became strident. She was strong in the view, but she, at least in my experience, she was never strident.
No, and I think she prided herself on that. How great for you that you got to witness that. Did you get a sense of, at the time, wow, this is something really different here?
Yeah, I mean, she was in the course of systematically, as I say, dismantling these laws, and it was pretty clear she was going to win. That particular case was an Alabama statute about women being excused from grand jury duty as a favor to them. And but one of her themes, as you know, is don't do us any favors.
Yeah. No, I mean, supposedly we're protecting you. Well, the protection turned out to be a kind of cage, as you know. I mean, it really is interesting to think about what our lives were like back then. A woman could just be fired for being pregnant. A wife had to get her husband's permission to get bank credit. And, in many states, a married man could not be charged with raping his spouse. I mean, these were things that were just kind of woven into the law and practices. And it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg who thought that the U.S. Constitution should treat every American equally, regardless of gender. But, one of my favorite quotes in our interview, actually really the favorite, when she said, when we're asking her about taking this on, she said, well, I thought of myself as a kindergarten teacher because the justices didn't think that discrimination existed. They just didn't get it. And I love that, not a teacher, a kindergarten teacher.
Exactly. And she had a lot of teaching to do, and they were all men she was teaching for the most part.
And she wasn't going to do it by yelling at them. She was going to do it by convincing them.
Well, and she was that way when I saw her in oral argument. She did not raise her voice at all. She stood up to Whizzer White, Justice White, who was really trying to push her around a bit. And she was very determined, but very mild-mannered. How much of her attitude toward women came from her mother? That's quite a story with her mother and what her mother did and tried to do for her. But also her remarkable, really equal relationship with Marty, her husband, himself a remarkable tax lawyer, a brilliant tax lawyer.
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, her mother was the most influential person in her young life. Her mother was from all accounts, very smart, but had not been able to go to college because in her family, the boys were sent off, and there was a boy who went to college, not her mother. And so after her older sister died quite young, Ruth Bader became the object of all her mother's attention, an only child, and her mother would take her to the library and she would expose her to music and to concerts. And you got a sense that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was so proud of her mother. She used to say, you know, what's the difference between a bookkeeper and a Supreme Court justice? One generation. I mean, she felt, you know, that she was carrying on what her mother could have done. So I think that was, you know, obviously her mother died when she was 17, just on the eve of her graduation from high school, but, you know, had given her a great grounding. And then, of course, there's Marty, who she met in college and famously said was, because, you know, you see in the pictures from the documentary, she was a beautiful woman with no lack of suitors. And yet she says that Marty Ginsburg was the first boy who cared that I had a brain. And he saw in her the brilliance that eventually was displayed to the rest of us. He believed in her, and he really wasn't threatened by her in any way. He became a lawyer, an extremely successful tax lawyer. But when the time came, he stepped back a little bit in order to allow his wife to shine and fulfill her promise.
Betsy, do you have a sense of what she made of the court toward the end of her time? Because she was there for 27 years. The court evolved. It changed in various ways. One of them was it became more conservative overall. She started out with some majorities. She ended up a very, very effective dissenter. It also became more political. It became much more, at least in the public eye, the subject of a lot of politics. What did she make of that?
Well, you know, I can't say exactly. I know that she maintained very good relationships with all of her colleagues on the court, including her more conservative colleagues, no matter what her private feelings must have been. I think she really felt that it was extremely important to have civil discourse. And as you say, I mean, she dreamed, I'm sure, of writing many majority opinions, but she wound up being the great dissenter. And then she had to accommodate herself to the idea that perhaps she was writing these dissents for the ages and the hope that they would be quoted or used in majority opinions down the line. And we'll see whether or not that happens. But, you know, she was a pragmatic person. And one of the things about having great relationships with your colleagues is perhaps you'll be able to pull them over to your side once in a while, which I think she did, certainly with Justice Roberts a few times.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, whether there'll be a majority opinions or not, I know that she'll be quoted well into the ages, no question about it. Thank you so much, Betsy. Really great to have you with us. Betsy West, she's co-director of the award-winning documentary RBG. And now it's time to get a check on the markets. Joining us now is Abigail Doolittle. So we sort of picked up where we left off, haven't we? Abigail, still down?
We are still down, risk-off tone for sure, but off the lows. It's pretty interesting, David, because at the lows, the S&P 500 had been down about 2.7%, now down about 2%, but where the more dramatic improvement has been is for the tech-heavy NASDAQ at the lows, down about 2.4%, now down about 0.7%. This as Apple, the world's largest publicly traded company, is trading higher at this point. It seems like there's some technical action happening there for Apple. You could make the case that August, that 43% rally from the earnings report back in July to the recent peak in early September should never have happened, that the stock was already fairly valued. So some of that froth is truly coming off. And pointing to the idea, David, that that's the case on a cross-asset basis, we do have bonds trading higher, but it's certainly not a flight to safety. And the yen is just about flat. So it's going to be interesting to see how these markets close out. If Apple continues to climb, perhaps we will come well off the lows.
Yeah, exactly. And it's nothing compared to what we had back in the spring, right? I mean, sure, it's off, but nothing like that.
Nothing like that at all. That was true panic selling. You saw across the board, cross asset class, that investors were rushing towards safety out of the risk assets. That is not happening at all at this point. Again, it really seems as though it's a correction of the idea that the big rally that we saw across the board in August, it really should never have happened. investors got ahead of themselves. As you made the case a couple weeks ago, what goes up must come down. Now we're seeing some of that. It's a question of where support is.
Okay, thank you so much to Abigail Doolittle for that report on the markets. Coming up here, we talk with the number 2 Democrat in the Senate, Dick Durbin of Illinois, about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and what comes next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It took just over an hour from the time the world learned of the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg until the political maneuvering began, with Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tweeting that the Senate would move forward expeditiously to vote on whomever President Trump nominates, despite how close we are to the major election. We talked with the second most powerful Democrat in the Senate, Minority Whip Dick Durbin of Illinois, about that maneuvering, but we started out asking him to reflect on the effect Justice Ginsburg had on the law and on the nation.
When you met her for the first time, I can recall the day, I was noted how she was slight in stature, but apparently in her lifetime, just a pillar of strength. What a valiant lady. I mean, she really experienced the kind of discrimination and adversity which women have faced for generations. But she didn't go quietly. She fought back at every level of her life and made a real difference. I know that because since she passed, I have run into so many women in my own family who have opened up and told me publicly what they had felt about her. It was an intense feeling. She was, in fact, their shero. She was the woman they looked to as a really guiding force in their lives and in the life of our country. The only thing I regret is that so much time has been spent, so many words have been wasted on the political side of her succession and not enough time reflecting on her life. To think that she died within days of John Lewis, a civil rights icon himself, is a reminder to all of us that there are very few of these greats still left in our midst.
And she left behind a world very different from the one she found, for the reasons you suggest. And it strikes me that basically, no matter who you are, Republican or Democrat, even President Trump right now, there's no question it has to be a woman who succeeds her. That in itself, in a sense, is an accomplishment.
It is, very much so. And I think it's an indication of America moving forward. Just as Black Lives Matter, the lives of women certainly matter, the lives of everyone matters in America. But it's a reminder. I mean, this is a given now. We are going to fill her vacancy with a woman.
So, Senator, it would have been tragic for Ruth Bader Ginsburg to pass away at any time, but right now, on the eve of an election, it is particularly fraught. Put aside, if we can, for the moment, the election. In the normal course, what's the process? How long should it take to make sure we're making a good decision? You in the Senate are making a good decision on appointing a Supreme Court justice.
Well, imagine, this is an appointment to the highest court in the land, a lifetime appointment. We know that there are decisions hanging in the balance on this choice, this selection. And in ordinary times, we would try to make certain that it was a person who was moderate in their approach, someone that we could trust would weigh the evidence and consider the law in an objective way. But we have departed from that so dramatically. And in this situation, we all recall on the Democratic side 4 years ago when Senator McConnell said to President Obama, though you were duly elected by the American people, you have no power in the closing year of your office to fill a vacancy on the Supreme Court. In that case, it was Anton Scalia. Well, that had never been the case before. And yet McConnell announced that that was the new principle. That was the new guidepost when it came to filling vacancies by a president. And his membership marched right behind him and said that's going to be the standard from this point forward. So here we are 4 years later. The same thing occurs with a Republican president, and McConnell wastes no time saying, oh, that standard, we're going to abandon it completely. We're going to say that this vacancy needs to be filled by Donald Trump and approved by the Republican Senate, even if it's the last day before the election.
And we remember that Merrick Garland, a distinguished Court of Appeals judge from the District of Columbia, didn't even get a hearing on that. The court would look quite differently if, in fact, he'd been confirmed. But as a practical matter, if they have the votes, is there anything to stop the Republicans from moving forward?
Well, let me just say about Merrick Garland first. He was not only so well qualified for this position, but he was treated so badly by Senator McConnell and those senators. They didn't give him a hearing. They refused to meet with him, to even sit down in their office and meet with President Obama's suggested nominee. You asked the key question. People say, well, what can you do about it, Durbin? You can complain as much as you wish. And it really boils down to the reality. It takes the conscience of 4 Republican senators who will say, we will not be hypocritical. We will stand by the statements we made 4 years ago. We will wait until after the election and let the next president, if it's President Trump or President Biden, whoever it happens to be, fill this vacancy. It takes that. We have no power as Democrats when it comes to the ultimate outcome otherwise.
So these are your colleagues. You know them well. And it's impossible to know when the vote comes exactly what they'll do. But right now, as you try to count the votes, do you think there are 4 who would stop? We've already have 2 who've suggested they at least have substantial reservations. Other people have said, no, I'll go ahead. Do you have a sense of how that vote may come out?
Well, I can tell you that it's hard to find people who will stand up under these circumstances. I've watched the Republican Senate caucus basically silent, if not cowering, before President Trump when he ridiculed one of their heroes, John McCain. I mean, for goodness sakes, when that happened, it should have been a clarion call to the Republicans in the Senate. It's time to stand up for what we believe in. But they wouldn't do it. So many of them said, we're just going to go along. They were afraid of political retribution by Trump and his followers. And here again, they have the same challenge. Some of them have gone through the humiliating experience of reversing stated public positions that they made 4 years ago and said, take me on, hold me to this standard. This is the way it will be. And now they've reversed themselves. How embarrassing that must be for them personally. But maybe, just maybe, 2 more will stand up, and that's what it takes.
We are just before an election. It's not just for president, it's also for a third of the Senate. Some of those senators who are up for election will be actually on the Judiciary Committee at the time. How does this cut in that election as a practical matter? Does it make President Trump stronger in making them agree with him, or might they actually split because they need to for the votes?
Well, it's interesting. When you ask people across Illinois and most parts of America, what's the #1 issue in this election? Not surprisingly, it's about healthcare. We're in the midst of a pandemic. People are very sensitive to their own health and their future, and they are concerned as to whether or not their health insurance will be there if they need it. That's where the Supreme Court steps in. It's important for us to really convince the American people this is not just a debate among the big shots in Washington at the highest levels. This is the decision on the future of a court which will have an impact on your health insurance and whether your family will be covered. And so when the Supreme Court decides the future of the Affordable Care Act, it affects every family. That's the issue that senators, my colleagues who are up for re-election, have to take into consideration. They have to go home and explain how they could in any way endanger the health insurance of Americans in the midst of a pandemic.
As you say, we have the challenge to the Affordable Care Act that the Trump administration is backing, that is challenging it right now, pending for the court, will get decided sometime after the election. We also had an instance about 20 years ago now where the Supreme Court had to get involved in a presidential election. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was very influential in that, in the sense that she wrote the dissent from the decision in Bush versus Gore. What are the ramifications here if, in fact, we have some challenges? Because right now we have something like 245 lawsuits brought already about this election.
There's no question in my mind that the decision by the American people in this election, unless it is overwhelming, is going to be contested in the court of public opinion first, then possibly in the courts and even beyond. This president has said he won't accept any verdict of the American people that doesn't reelect him. Anything else he said would be a fraud and would be cheating. That's where he starts. We've had no president in the history of the United States say what Donald Trump has said about America's elections. So yes, the court will play a role in deciding who the next president may be.
Also reflect, if you will, for a moment on what this means for the institution of the Supreme Court itself. There was a day that you can remember, I can remember, when it was not very political. These nomination fights were not fought at all. There was a one day. I clicked for Justice Powell, and he was approved in a matter of an hour, I think, as a practical matter. His hearing was nothing at all. What have we done to the institution of the Supreme Court, and what is at risk right now in how we handle this nomination?
Well, and I can tell you as well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, representing the ACLU, arguing before the Supreme Court, outspoken in her positions, approved by the United States Senate 96-3. 96-3. So it tells you there was a time when we just didn't do the litmus test on issues with someone going on the Supreme Court. We really looked to their qualifications and whether or not they could serve us over the course of a lifetime. And as you know, there have been many justices who went to the court with people expecting certain things to happen, and it didn't happen. These justices in lifetime appointments started reflecting on issues differently. It happens. But we have politicized the Supreme Court. I think the refusal to fill the Scalia vacancy was a breaking point. And now look what we're going through. It has to be someone approved by Donald Trump before the Republicans will consider them. We should ask for more than that. We really need women and men on the court who are people of principle and value.
Senator Durbin, is there some fault both sides? Because we did have the instance with Harry Reid, with Court of Appeals judges at least, saying we won't have the 60-vote rule. Is there some fault on both sides? Is this a little bit Hatfield's and McCoy's?
Well, of course there's fault on both sides. But I would say, going back to Harry Reid's decision, I sat next to him when he made this decision. At this point, Mitch McConnell had overused the filibuster in a way never seen in the history of the United States Senate. Hundreds and hundreds of filibusters to stop judges, and in this case, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. McConnell made it clear he was going to do everything in his power to delay the business of the Senate so that we couldn't fill the vacancies on that court. And that's when Harry Reid made his decision. He just decided if you're willing to abuse the filibuster to that extent, we have to change the rules. And that was his decision.
So finally, Senator, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but there's a lot of talk going on right now that, in fact, if there's a nomination made and it's pushed through either before the election or in a lame duck, there might be consequences if, in fact, the Senate goes to the Democrats and, in fact, former Vice President Biden gets elected president. What do you make of the discussion of doing away with the filibuster rule? And by the way, some call it packing the court, not quite the way FDR did, but actually increasing the membership. Is there some point at which we draw back from the abyss?
Well, I hope we do, and I hope we can. A great deal depends on filling this Ruth Bader Ginsburg vacancy and how it ends. But I will tell you this, for months, I have been pleading with my caucus to try to remember what the Senate used to be. You know, in the last calendar year, how many amendments were considered on the floor of the United States Senate in 2019? 22. In the entire year, 22. 6 of them by Rand Paul that were just throwaway amendments where he said, you can't go home unless you give me a vote. 6 of the 22. And so the Senate, once a deliberative body, once one that considered legislation, has become something far different. That conversation has started long before Ruth Bader Ginsburg's demise, and it should continue. In terms of the future of the court and the Constitution, I'm not going to speculate on that. But the Senate has got to reach the point where it actually can roll up its sleeves and do the people's business. Under Mitch McConnell, it has deteriorated beyond description.
That was part of my talk earlier today with Senate Minority Whip Dick Durbin of Illinois. We're hearing from the Democrats, like Dick Durbin. We are not hearing from the Republicans because reportedly the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, sent out a note to all of his caucus saying, don't talk, keep your powder dry, as he put it. Even if you think you're inclined not to confirm, then please keep quiet. So we're not hearing from the Republicans, at least thus far. At the same time, President Trump has now said he's going to name his next nominee for the Supreme Court by the end of this week, Friday or Saturday, he said. He doesn't want to press forward with the confirmation. We have to bear in mind that there's not that much time left for the Senate because at least a third of them need to get home and start their process of campaigning. So there's very little time left, but they're going to try to push it through. It will be very controversial, particularly if, in fact, the Senate goes to the Democrats and the people voting in the lame duck session for the new nominee, some of them aren't going to be there a month later. So there's a lot to keep watching about this politically, as well as what the Supreme Court will be dealing with. By the way, on top of it all, 2 weeks from today is the first day of the new term in which they're going to decide things like the legitimacy of the Affordable Care Act. Up next here, this week, we're going to turn to the swing state of North Carolina and get the lay of the land from the head of the politics department at Catawba College. That's in Salisbury, North Carolina. Plus, next hour, we're going to hear from Eleanor Holmes Norton of Washington, D.C. She's the representative of the District of Columbia to the Congress. She was a close personal friend of Justice Ginsburg. They also had worked in many ways the same way as legal advocates for civil rights for many, many years. That's coming up in the second hour on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the United States is applying sanctioning Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro without providing details on what the sanctions were. Today's announcement came as Secretary Pompeo unveiled new sanctions on nations or entities which do business with Iran. The United States is about to reach a grim milestone. The number of COVID-19 related deaths is approaching 200,000. Former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb says he expects the U.S. to experience, quote, at least one more cycle of the virus in the fall and winter. More than 961,000 people around the world have died from the coronavirus. China is boosting the risk of military confrontation in the Taiwan Strait, hoping to deter Taipei from continuing to deepen ties with the United States. China is ratcheting up tensions in the Taiwan Strait, hoping to deter Taipei from deeper ties with the U.S. In a series of military exercises, China repeatedly breached the median line separating the two countries. Beijing regards the island as part of its territory, even though it's been ruled separately for more than 70 years. President Trump says he plans to announce his pick to replace Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg by Friday or Saturday of this week. The president also told Fox News he wants to see a Senate confirmation vote for his nominee before November's election. Mr. Trump has said he will likely pick a woman. Justice Ginsburg died Friday at the age of 87. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks so much, Mark. Each week in the run-up to the election, we're going to take a look at one of the critical swing states. Last week, it was Arizona we looked at. This week, it is North Carolina. And to give us a sense of the politics of the state and how they may be changing, we welcome now Professor Michael Bitzer. He is chair of the Department of Politics at Catawba College. So, Professor, thank you so much for being with us. Give us your sense, a snapshot right now of North Carolina, and what is it? Is it blue? Is it red? Is it purple? What is it? What is it?
We are a purple state with a very slight tint to red. We're center lean right, but it's all dependent upon who shows up. And what has happened here in North Carolina after 2008 and particularly 2010 is that North Carolinians have basically sorted themselves into the respective partisan camps. You know, in 2004, George W. Bush won this state by 13 percentage points, and the Democratic governor who was running for re-election also won by 13 percentage points. That day of North Carolinians splitting their tickets has now shrunk to probably 3 to 5% of the electorate. Most North Carolinians have their minds made up going into November 3rd.
So that's true sort of across the country, it appears. There's a low number of undecideds. Give us a sense, if you're campaigning in North Carolina, is a geographic difference? What do you really want to focus on? What are the key counties, for example? Are there key counties you have to get?
I think certainly out of the 100 counties in North Carolina, 12 of them will deliver 50% of the vote. And those are the major urban counties: Mecklenburg, home to Charlotte; Wake County, home to Raleigh, the state capital. But it's critical that within those urban counties, the suburbs within those urban counties are indeed the true battlegrounds. Central cities like Charlotte and Raleigh voted for Hillary Clinton 2-1 in 2016. If you go to the surrounding suburban counties, Donald Trump won those counties 2-1 in 2016. It's those urban suburbs that literally split 50-50, slight edge to Hillary Clinton in 2016. I'm going to be watching those to see if there's any slippage among the Republicans in those areas, and how deep is the margin in those surrounding suburban counties. Can Democrats eat into that Republican advantage?
How fast is North Carolina growing? That is to say, are there a fair number of voters today that weren't even there in 2016?
There is, and nearly 2 million new registered voters since 2016. So this state continues to grow exponentially, as does our registered voter pool, slightly over 7 million registered voters so far. And out of that, we already have nearly 1 million North Carolinians who are registered voters who have requested an absentee by mail ballot. That is unheard of in this state. So the interest and the enthusiasm is certainly through the roof here in North Carolina.
So just looking at the Real Clear Politics average of the polls, which is one way to look at it, it looks like it's like 1% for Biden right now in North Carolina, which is essentially a dead heat, effectively. How do you play it right now? Is it a dead heat, and is it really fighting over that very small number of people that are undecided?
It truly is. You know, I heard one political consultant say if a candidate wins by more than 5% in this state, that's a landslide. And so Donald Trump won this state a little over 3.5 percentage points. Tom Tillis in 2014 by 1.5 points. So this is going to be a very tight election. It's all dependent upon, again, who shows up and how do the campaigns motivate and energize their respective bases.
And what are the issues? Because there's some speculation right now with the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg that has really elevated the importance of the Supreme Court. Is that true in North Carolina? And if so, which way do you think it cuts?
Honestly, I think it's too early to determine that here in North Carolina, but I think the key voting block will be suburban women. How does the president's pick play to them? Are they willing to look past his other issues and concerns that they have about the president and vote purely on the court and the court nominee that he puts forward? I think that's just going to be the critical component, white suburban women in those competitive battleground states of North Carolina.
You mentioned Senator Tillis. Give us a sense of how that race is doing, because, again, looking at the Real Clear Politics average, at least, he's losing by about 3.5 percentage points, which was probably within the margin of error.
It is certainly within the margin of error, but interestingly, he's playing behind the president's numbers here in the state. And early on, he made a concerted effort to tie himself to President Trump. When President Trump's approval ratings started to slip in this state, so too did his numbers as well. So he needs to hope that this Supreme Court pick really energizes and pulls the base back to supporting him come November 3rd.
Okay, Professor, really great to have you with us. That was very instructive. That's Professor Michael Bitzer of Catawba College. Coming up here, we're going to take a look at how much political risk is driving down the stocks today. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. Whether it's concern over possible banking irregularities or increased political uncertainty or new worries about the virus, we are seeing a pattern right now of equity sell-offs. Here to give us some understanding of what is going on is Christopher Smart, Barings Chief Global Strategist and Investment Institute Head. So, Christopher, thank you so much for being here. So explain this to us. It's sort of a Rubik's Cube. What is going on with equities?
Well, they're going down. I think, these are headlines we're getting today. The markets would have blown right through them at a point, earlier this summer, and we would have scratched our heads maybe in a different direction. Clearly, the mood has soured on a number of fronts that has created some, air pockets for the market. The dollar has spiked today. We've seen the yields falling a little bit. I think a lot of it is atmospherics. What do you make of these bank investigations? What do you make of pre-election jitters and that sort of thing? But I think fundamentally, it's a couple of things that are drawing into question, what investors are trying to get a handle on, news of next year. Does the Senate confirmation of a new Supreme Court justice mean that further stimulus is going to be delayed, and is there a shutdown at risk? Also, we've heard from a lot of central banks last week, not entirely clear if they are going to be able to deliver sort of the next stage of growth. So I think those are the two bigger things that are driving markets today, in the midst of a swirl of other slightly unsettling headlines.
Christopher, do you think, and obviously it's difficult to know, markets are complicated things, but do you think that some of it may be the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, not so much about who's going to be in the Supreme Court, but the prospect that might make it more likely that we don't get an answer as quickly as we might like to the presidency? Is the question for the markets who's going to be president, or just knowing who it is going to be?
Well, I think some of it is around, it seems like the volume of our political discourse has been turned up another couple of notches in the last 48 hours. We're talking about constitutional changes. We're talking about, very big, a potential outcome of an election that is uncertain for a while. But I think fundamentally it's not so much those political jitters as much as it is, the way those jitters may impact the future fiscal path of the U.S. government, how the Federal Reserve and central banks around the world will be able to support global growth as well. So those political atmospherics are important, but maybe not quite as important as how they will impact future fiscal and monetary policy.
Well, let's talk about that, because as a practical matter, I mean, with maybe some little rounding around the edges, the presidency is not going to affect what the Fed does. The Fed seems to be on a path. But fiscal stimulus is quite different. This may well postpone it, as you suggest, might postpone for the time being as they wrangle over the confirmation. But in the longer term, former Vice President Biden has set out fiscal patterns that will be a lot of spending. Do the markets like that?
I think they do. I think you look at both a Trump presidency and a Biden presidency, and they both have a significant amount of fiscal support to them. There's actually another scenario where you have a Biden presidency and a Republican Senate still, where there could be a lot more standoff and maybe fiscal policy starts to tighten a lot more quickly than markets want. But I think overall, we're going to get supportive fiscal policy next year in the U.S. It's just that these short-term headlines raise the question of how much will we get, how soon will we get it, is there a chance of a shutdown now with this deadline and new business to confirm a Supreme Court justice on the docket?
Give us a sense of what the market is pricing in with respect to the coronavirus, because we did have the former head of the FDA come out today and say, you know what, I think there's going to be another wave here coming up in the fall. Something we had heard before, but he was pretty emphatic about it. We're approaching 200,000 people who've died in this country. Are the markets reacting to news over the virus at all at this point?
Well, it's, as you know, hard to separate. I think if we had this headline by itself today, maybe not much of a reaction, but it certainly doesn't help. Markets have always been, pricing in, expecting there would be some sort of another wave going into the fall and into the winter. I think maybe even more important than this news today is, the fact that we may have some more real lockdown measures taken. Not anything like we saw in March, but something that might actually slow down the recovery in certain sectors and certain parts of the economy. But
it's so hard. This is why your job is so hard. I don't envy you it. Because on the other hand, we had reports out of California and New Jersey that actually their tax receipts, particularly sales tax, are coming in much better than they thought. That they might not be in as bad shape, which would indicate maybe the economy in some ways is coming back faster than we really understand.
Well, I think that's absolutely true, and I think that's the problem with painting these things with too broad a brush. We have actually seen, the stimulus packages that have been delivered around the country since the spring have been very helpful in certain parts of the economy, particularly lower-income families. We've seen not just a recovery of durable goods and online shopping, but actually in-person retail shopping in certain parts of the country. And travel has begun to come back at a very low level. So there are pockets of recovery, and maybe that's why some of these broader headlines that they may not be so durable, or that the fiscal stimulus may not come as quickly or as broadly as we would have hoped. Those are the kinds of dampeners or clouds on the horizon that create market days like today.
Christopher, one of the things we lost with the pandemic for a time there was companies willing to go out on a limb and say what their earnings are going to be going forward, giving forward guidance. That's starting to come back, isn't it? At least with some significant portion of the companies. Is that supporting equities at this point?
I think partly, that's the good news, which is where the Fed did step in, restore liquidity in markets so that companies have been able to tap markets and they don't feel like there's any short-term liquidity problem. They are also beginning to feel like they can see some end demand. And you've seen that in markets and in analyst estimates, which overcompensated on the downside going into the spring. And now, as visibility is beginning to return, slowly but surely, that has also been very supportive of the market recovery up until last week. So I think generally speaking, investors are really straining hard to get a sense of what 2021 is going to look like. And that's why, the earnings on one side are helpful. The political clouds in Washington, delay in the stimulus are unhelpful.
Okay, thank you so much. Really helpful. Christopher Smart, he's Barings' chief global strategist. And now we talked about the markets generally. Let's get very specific, talk about the stock of the hour. JP Morgan and its banking peers are falling sharply on accusations of illegal money laundering, the latest hurdle in what has already been a tough year, it's fair to say. Scarlett Fu has a look at the story. So this snuck up on me, Scarlett.
It certainly did, and it's something that Chris Smart just referred to as well. Look, when you look at the S&P 500, banks are one of the worst performing groups in there. All 18 banks in the S&P 500 losing at least 3%, and it's global as well because the MSCI World Financials Index is down about 3.5% too. According to a new investigation by an international consortium of journalists, you've got documents showing internal compliance officers at banks flagging more than $2 trillion in questionable transactions over an 18-year period between 1999 and 2017. JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, among the biggest offenders, but they're not the only ones. You have some 90 financial institutions appearing in the documents. Now, these banks reportedly moved cash for people or entities that they couldn't identify, and then they neglected to file the required paperwork until years later. That's often the case. Now, the fines that do come as a result often don't do much as well because the investigation found large fines of HSBC and Standard Chartered led to an increase in what's called suspicious activity reports, but there was rarely any follow-up. Now, after the financial crisis, just for context here, David, banks beefed up their compliance staff to comply with new regulations. Compliance, of course, also includes monitoring potential money laundering and financial crimes. But at the same time, we know the operating environment has been extraordinarily difficult, less than ideal for these banks. Low interest rates led to falling margins. And yes, a lot of the banks with capital markets desks had a couple of boom years after 2009, but there are plenty of bust years as well. And you can see in terms of the share price, banks are facing their worst year since 2008. The industry has really struggled to regain its mojo, and the share prices reflect that. They've been underperforming the broader market. They're seen as this perennial value trap. Cost cutting ends up becoming the only way or one of the best ways of meeting your profit estimates. And at some level, you've got to think that affects the compliance departments at banks. And of course, banks' influence in the market has waned as well. They're now the fourth biggest sector in the S&P 500. Back in the days of 2005, they were the top dogs. They accounted for 21% of the S&P 500. Far from the case now these days.
So, Scarlett, let me put you on the spot here. It might also have something to do with the politics of it, because President Trump came to office saying, we've got too much banking regulation, let's still dial back on it. Banks can take that signal if they think that the cops are sort of easing off.
I suppose that could be one argument, but these transactions happened between 1999 and 2017, so it's not as if there wasn't a track record long before President Trump came into office. Clearly, this has been something that's been circulating for a number of years, 2 decades in this case, so I don't know that we can pin it all on a looser regulatory environment after President Trump arrived.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Scarlett. Thank you. That's Scarlett Fu reporting on Bank of America and Morgan Stanley and all the banks who are having problems. Coming up, Bloomberg Supreme Court reporter Greg Stohr joins us on the death of Justice Ginsburg and how it will influence cases in the court's new term. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Supreme Court appointments can change the court for a generation, but they can also have some more immediate effects depending on what issues are pending before the court. One of the big issues for the court to address this new term, which begins just 2 weeks from now, is the Affordable Care Act. To take us through the case before the court, we welcome now Bloomberg Supreme Court reporter Greg Stohr. So, Greg, welcome. This has already been focused on by the Biden camp, really focusing on the Affordable Care Act. It's particularly powerful, perhaps, within a pandemic going on. Give us a sense of what that case is that's pending.
Well, what it is, it's a case that's going to be argued a week after the election. It bears some similarities to the case the court decided in 2012 when they upheld the core of Obamacare and the individual mandate that at the time required people to buy insurance or pay a tax penalty. Chief Justice Roberts upheld the law then as a congressional tax, under the congressional taxing power, and then Republicans in Congress took away the tax. And so now opponents of the law are trying to overturn the entire law, saying the original rationale is no longer there because there's no tax, and the rest of the law can't stand without the individual mandate.
Well, was was Justice Ginsburg a pretty safe vote when she was there to support Affordable Care Act? Does it put it into question if you have a Republican nominee come in instead?
Yeah, it does. She certainly was a safe vote. She voted to uphold it in 2012 and in a later case involving a different issue. Going into the case, if you had asked me a week ago, David, I would have said the challenge to Obamacare was a real long shot because you still had the same 5 justices who upheld it in 2012 on the court. Now you only have 4, so defenders of the law are going to need another vote. That might come from Brett Kavanaugh. That could come from Sam Alito. There are pretty good arguments that Kavanaugh in particular would be reluctant to throw out the whole law, but it's by no means guaranteed.
Is Chief Justice Roberts a sure thing? Because he was really the swing vote, as I recall. He made it the 5th, but it was because he said it's a tax, right? It's not the Commerce Clause.
Right, and now that the tax is no longer there, it's at least theoretically possible that he would say, okay, there is no, you can't do this mandate to buy insurance under any other power like the commerce power, and therefore it's unconstitutional. The place where I think it would be really, really hard to get Roberts' vote is in that next step, which is, okay, that means we have to strike down the entire law. That's the kind of thing John Roberts really doesn't like to do. We saw a couple examples in his last term of cases where he severed out the unconstitutional part of a law, left the rest of it standing. So he's going to be a very tough vote for opponents of the law to get in this case.
Greg, here quickly at the end, give us a sense of the mechanics of it. You said the week after the election, it's somewhat unquestionable whether they'd actually have somebody confirmed then, even if they do it in the lame duck session. Do they have an oral argument without a justice, and then what happens when the justice comes?
They could, or they could put off the argument. If they don't have another justice and they take an initial vote in the case with just 8 of them and they're split 4-4, then they almost certainly would re-argue the case later on in the term when they do have a full bench.
So it would put it off even further.
It would, but as long as there's a justice confirmed reasonably soon, we can expect a decision by the end of June.
Fascinating. Okay, thank you so much. That's our great Supreme Court reporter. He is Greg Storr, reporting on the Affordable Care Act case coming up before the Supreme Court. Coming up, Balance of Power is going to continue on Bloomberg Radio. In our second hour, we'll talk to Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton, the District of Columbia delegate to Congress, who was very close to Justice Ginsburg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on Bloomberg Radio.